Today we're gonna talk about the real samurai of Zenless Zone Zero, the real warrior, the master of katana, constantly walking the line between life and death. With this beautiful prosthetic arm, she is our best girl, Sekiro! And this video is gonna teach you how to not die twice. I guess a lot of you has already witnessed how strong Miyabi is. She just kind of walk into the tier list, push all the DPS down a level, and basically create her own tier list. But to give you an even better picture of how strong Miyabi is that the free-to-play Miyabi team is as strong as the premium Yanagi team, as in Yanagi, Caesar, and Bernice, while Miyabi free-to-play team is Lucy and Piper. I tested with the stable No.10 so that it's elemental neutral for both team, and my Bernice is my Escape 1 on top of that, so I also provide this team tier list in the timestamp. You could jump to it if you want, but now I'm gonna talk about her most important tip, and that is build her crit rate until 80s and ignore everything else. And no, 12% crit rate from her 4th set doesn't count because the effects would only last for a few seconds on the next rotation. The 12% crit rate can only fully utilize in a hyper carry team comp because crit rate on Miyabi is basically double scaling. It would increase your anomaly mastery up to 80%, which is basically scaling 1-to-1 ratio with the crit rate. And I do think that 80% crit rate is definitely a sweet spot, but you could go as high as 88, and I think 70 is also good enough if you don't want to grind at the moment. The other agent that has the same mechanics is Jane though. Her anomaly proficiency would increase her crit rate. It's basically double scaling, so nothing matters until you reach 80% crit rate. So about the gear, you definitely wanna go with Miyabi 4 set and go with Woodpecker if you don't have enough crit rate. And if you get her signature weapon which gives 24% crit rate, Chaos Jazz 2 set and Freedom Blue 2 set is also a good choice. But if you have like crazy stat and you wanna min-max it, Puffer Punk's Astro Voice and Hormone Punks would help you reach that ceiling because you would probably have too much anomaly proficiency and crit rate if you have really good gear. And this number 4, you definitely wanna go for crit rate or crit damage, depends if you have enough crit rate or not. And this number 5, you wanna go for pen ratio if you are using elemental buffer like Lighter and Sokaku. Attacks and elemental damage are pretty much the same, just go with the one with the better substat. And for this number 6, some content creator might suggest attacks over the anomaly mastery, but as I tested, anomaly mastery is definitely a much safer choice. But the reality is, it really depends on your team. If you're playing hyper carry Miyabi, then it's gonna favor attacks a lot more, and you would also get the 12% crit rate for 15 seconds if you're playing that way. And if you're playing Disorder team, you definitely wanna go with anomaly mastery. It's gonna be a lot more consistent, so I would highly recommend anomaly mastery for a general player. But in JP side, the energy regen is also an option. I'll just put the information here. It kind of makes sense in some way, but I wouldn't test it. Feel free to do whatever you want with that information, but I wouldn't suggest it. And about the W engine, this is the JP side of tier list. The attacker crit rate W engine seems to favor the hyper carry team, but it doesn't perform as well in the Disorder team. So for the Disorder team, which I think most of you guys are playing that way, Fusion Compiler is the best, then follow with the Gemini, then Rainforest Gourmet to the attacker crit rate W engine. And this is the power levels when you are using the hyper carry team, and there's absolutely no debate with her signature W engine. It's gonna improve Miyabi's performance significantly. It's gonna motivate Miyabi to the outer space. So the way to play Miyabi is actually kind of easy. She's not that hard. All you do is really just keep using her skill and use her fully charged attacks when your stack is full, and basic attacks when you don't have any energy until her anomaly is procs. Then you swap to other anomaly characters until their anomaly overlap the Miyabi's anomaly, aka trigger the disorder. Then you swap back to Miyabi, then repeat the process. And you wanna use her as an initiator because 2 of her passive allow her to build up anomaly really fast. Like upon you hitting the enemy, you're gonna proc this passive called the Ice Fire, which gives you tons of anomaly builds up, depends on your crit rate, up to 80%, and it activates upon hitting, so you don't actually miss anything, even if you're hitting it without the Ice Fire. And this is the beautiful grab that I took it from Apo, awesome creator by the way. You got 3 stack from Ultimate, you got 2 stack from Disorder, including Yanagi's Polarity Disorder, and 2 stack from her skill, and 1 stack when you trigger the anomaly, but it only works every 10 seconds, so it's not gonna be so useful except for your initial rotation. So basically you wanna use her skill as soon as you have it because it gives you tons of anomaly builds up, even more than her fully charged attack. Even though it does respectable amounts of damage, I don't find it so crucial in the disorder setting, but I do know that it does a lot of damage when you are playing it with the attacks percentage on this number 6 in the hyper carry team comp, which I don't really have much knowledge about because I don't really have the unit to do that. So the rotation guide is gonna be more focused on the disorder, and it's simpler than you think. So basically if you already know how to play disorder, you already know how to play Miyabi in disorder setting. And basically her element is considered as a unique element, so you could play disorder ice team with Miyabi, but she does benefit buff from Sokaku, Lighter, and the ice disc set. So in her disorder rotation, you wanna start off with a buffer, then you get in with Miyabi, and you wanna prioritize using her skill first. If you ran out of skill, you use basic attacks, and once your charge is full, just use it no matter what. And after you trigger your anomaly, you just switch off the other characters. And let's use Yanagi here, and you let Yanagi build up her anomaly, and you wanna use Yanagi or other disorder unit to trigger the anomaly. Then you wanna pre-build your anomaly to like about 50% of it to set up for a faster disorder trigger time for the Miyabi, because Miyabi's element scales pretty well on how early you trigger the disorder. So as you can see, I got 234,000 on instant disorder, and if I procs it after 8 seconds, I would get 162,000. And if I procs it after 18 seconds, I would only get 72,000. So you wanna proc Miyabi's disorder as soon as possible. And to mitigate that, you wanna pre-build the anomaly, and you wanna always have anomaly mastery on the other anomaly unit on this number 6. And yeah, it's a huge W for those who pull for Yanagi's signature weapon, which also increased the anomaly builds up. And yeah, that's really it with her rotation. And if you're looking for something that is more advanced, just keep listening. So the first thing is how to use her fully charged attack. So basically you want to use it as soon as your stack is max, unless you are in the middle of the other anomaly unit's rotation, like you gotta wait for them to proc the disorder before you swap back into Miyabi, and you don't want to use it at its 4 stack. The anomaly builds up and the damage that 4 stack gives is night and day difference to the fully charged attack. It would be much better if you just normal attacks. I don't see any scenario that 4 stack charge attack would be beneficial, and you wanna use her fully charged attack. Even your anomaly builds up is at 99%, and it's gonna waste a lot of your anomaly builds up, but you should still do it. And no, you're not doing it for the damage, you are doing it to recover the energy for the next rotation while giving okay amounts of damage. And mainly it's because you're gonna overstack it most of the time when you are playing it with Yanagi. But what about other disorder team that doesn't have Yanagi? I have tested it with Piper, and this tip still works just fine because you got simply too many sources of stack, like her ultimate and her skill. The charge attack is not as important as you think. You don't have to save it for the best moment or the best timing. It is more dispendable than you think. So the number 1 mistake that a lot of Miyabi's players are doing is is that they swap to other characters before they procs the anomaly. I actually feels like discovering fire again doing this, because one of the thing about anomaly is that if you swap your characters before you trigger it, when my Miyabi is using skill, it's not gonna procs, and I could do it over and over again. And the same principle also apply to her fully charged hold attacks. If I use my Miyabi here and I swap to Rina and it's not gonna procs, basically slaughter more than half of her kit, you only wanna do this kind of animation cancel when you already procs the Frostburn. I actually don't think this is an issue until I see Mr. Pokey, the other Sendless Zone Zero content creator, did this mistake. So basically he swapped off Miyabi too early, wasting all her anomaly. Bro just missed the entire thing without even realize it. And notice the ice fire effects on the enemy that indicate he didn't procs it, and that is the first Frostburn that he applied. He only applied less than 1% of anomaly throughout this rotation. So what you want to do is you always want to wait for the Frostburn to procs then swap. While his tip and advice is legit, but you gotta do it after you procs the anomaly. And I only use this tech after I already procs the Frostburn, and mainly to recover Miyabi's energy. Miyabi probably has the most invincibility in the game, and this is her basic attack. The first 3 hit is not gonna have the invincibility. Her basic 4 and 5 would have invincibility, and the 5th basic would parry the enemy. And when you dodge attack, it would take her into 4 and 5. So don't be afraid to keep spamming the basic attacks until she finishes her last animation. Quick assist would also chain her into 4 and 5. Her defense assist doesn't chain her into 4 and 5. And the other thing is, unlike Yanagi or other unit in the game, you could press basic attack slowly and the combos would connect, but you need to press faster for Miyabi for the combo to connect. So this is the team tier list that I made, even though I test some of it by myself, and I also looked into other content creators' opinion and made this tier list out of those information. But the main data is coming from this person, from Kohei channel, and I will go over each team. It comes to nobody's surprise that Caesar Yanagi is the best team for Miyabi, but I gotta say that it has to be Caesar with her signature weapon to have this levels amounts of buff, or else Caesar is gonna perform roughly the same as Lucy on paper in terms of DPS. The Miyabi Yanagi duo with any support, including Sokaku, are quite solid, but I didn't put it on T0 because Sokaku needs a lot of time to buff, but definitely a solid option. And Miyabi Bernice duo is not far behind from the Yanagi duo. You could just slap any support into this team and it would decimate everything on the way. The Lighter Lucy team is also solid. I don't really get to test this out. Piper Lucy duo with Miyabi is actually a surprise to me because it's actually stronger than the Yanagi premium team, and I think it has to do with how Miyabi's normally work. Like the sooner you trigger it, the more damage you're gonna get, and it scales really well with unit like Piper, who builds up the anomaly really quickly to fit in Miyabi's anomalies characteristic, which I will make the videos about it and demonstrate the Lucy Piper rotation. So at tier 0.5, I use Yanagi premium team as the gatekeeper, so you guys would have better time to understand the power levels of the team in the 0.5. And basically Miyabi Yanagi plus Bernice is not as strong as people would think, and Shinji works just fine. And Miyabi Lycon Sokaku team, I gotta say that on this number 5 on Miyabi, you're gonna use the penetration ratio because Sokaku just simply give too much elemental buff. Just like Lighter, when you're playing Miyabi with Lighter, you also have to use pen ratio on this number 5. But I do think that attack and elemental damage are still doing just fine in Lighter Sokaku team. I would say you don't want to stress over it if you're not looking to min-max it. Let me know in the comment which team is underrated. So this one is going to be the showcase of the Miyabi Rina Yanagi team. So I start with Rina to buff Miyabi. The number 1 priorities is make sure that you procs the anomaly and then swap to the other characters to procs the disorder. And I gotta say that you wanna have the Mindscape 1 Rina, so make sure that you get yourself one when you get your 300 ticket, So as you can see in the rotation, I don't really pre-build the anomaly here, like what I said in the guide, because if the enemy would die even without pre-building it. And I think that's pretty much it, and see ya guys.